It looks like we have all parties present and accounted for, so I will open the meeting. It's now 5:30 on May 13th. This is the Urban Renewal Budget Committee meeting. Meeting is now open. Start off with roll call. Start with you.
Joanne McCall.
Tony Conkle.
Wyatt Parno.
Rachel L. Smith.
Katie Riggs.
Ray Gordon.
Denise McGriff.
Steve Van Haverbeek.
Rocky Smith.
William Gifford.
Josh Penn.
Chris Cook.
And Frank O'Donnell.
And then we also have staff in the back. We have Maria McElvey and Aaron Wilkie.
Note that the mayor is unable to attend for medical reasons tonight, so I'll start as the chairperson. Now, at this point, we're going to elect a chairperson. Do we have any nominations for chair?
Nominate Frank O'Donnell.
I'll second it.
Accepted. Let's do it. And I
We're
don't.
gonna take a vote.
Call for
All
the
those in
question.
favor?
Yeah, all those in favor?
Nominations, close the nominations.
I've been working with the mayor
I
too
just
often.
said I
just
call
think
for
it's
the
like-
question.
I thought it was divine right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Do we need a vice chair or no?
Secretary.
Okay, now we open nominations for secretary, which I don't think is a very demanding job
Yeah,
since
I'm
we
gonna
have
volunteer
recordings
to do it.
going.
That's why it's so demanding.
You volunteer.
Right.
I'm volunteering myself.
All right.
Good.
Motion.
Then I'll nominate Denise McGriff to be secretary.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Hearing none, we're off and running. We'll open the meeting for public comments. If there's anyone wants to make a public comment, please speak now. Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. The minutes, this is item 19-260, the minutes of the May 10th, 2017 Urban Renewal Budget Committee meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
And the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Done. We'll now open this for our budget message from our budget officer. Tony, do you want to speak first, or are we going to go directly to Wyatt?
Yep. I'll go ahead and take that. Thank you.
Okay.
Commission President, evening. Budget Committee members, thank you once again for taking the time to help us as we work on the 2019 to 2021 proposed Oregon City Urban Renewal Agency budget. For this biennium, which is the period of July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2021, the total budget is $11,549,980. The agency is a separate legal entity from the City of Oregon City that is established under state law. Oregon Revised Statute 457.035 sub 1 creates a public body, corporate, and politic to be known as the Urban Renewal Agency for each municipality. The Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission is responsible for providing oversight for the district as specified in the Downtown North End Urban Renewal Plan, which was amended in September of '07. As many of you would remember, in November of 2016, voters approved Measure 3-514, which was intended to limit the use of urban renewal in Oregon City. On July 18th of 2017, the Circuit Court determined that the measure is preempted by Oregon Revised Statute, Chapter 457. The court found that the measure is inconsistent with state law, and the agency's expenditures are not restricted. That decision is currently on appeal to the Court of Appeals. Over the prior 3 years, Oregon City's general fund has paid for the agency's bills, including minimum staff time and contracts to operate. Following equitable financial practices, the proposed budget includes repayment of these costs. However, the budget does not include funding for any new urban renewal projects. The Commission has clearly stated their intent to comprehensively review the value of urban renewal as a tool to eliminate blight and enhance the downtown area. It's very important to the Commission to engage residents to determine acceptable uses for the agency or whether there should be an agency at all. The proposed budget is funded by total biennial revenues of $6.1 million, excluding beginning fund balances. Revenues increased by $938,000 from the previous budget. Tax increment increases are budgeted at 4.5% for each year of the biennium. Other revenue sources include income from property rentals and investment income. Projected spending for the biennium totals $4.2 million and is comprised of debt repayments, the loan repayment to Oregon City, minimum operating and legal costs, and the agency's remaining obligation to the Cove project, which is a carryover from the prior budget. Finally, the budget includes costs to operate agency-owned rental properties. A reserve fund for future expenditures of $7.2 million is available for appropriation to projects or debt payoff pending the Urban Renewal Commission's review. The plan includes an established debt limit of $130.1 million as a maximum for urban renewal investment, and the debt outstanding on July 1, 2019 will be approximately $7 million. So once again, really limiting the expenditures from the district until such time as the Urban Renewal Commission can have a discussion on how they would like to move forward with urban renewal, whether that's to close it down, to continue to operate it pending a larger public discussion, public vote, whatever that may come to. And then, as always, this is we've as I've put this together with Wyatt, was really kind of a holding budget. We felt it was equitable and important to repay the general fund for costs incurred while we were in litigation concerning how urban renewal funds could be utilized. And when there you're looking at my time, Wyatt's time, economic development manager's time, attorney time in fighting that, in preparing that litigation for circuit court, as well as the negotiations that we had with Hudson Holding around, or I'm sorry, not Hudson Holding. Hudson Holding for the Cove Part 2, but also some of the work that went into the first phase of the Cove as well. So we do feel that those reimbursements are justified and reasonable relative to the effort and expenses that went into managing the district with those general fund money. So really this is trying to be respectful of the disposition and development agreement that's been approved. That's the $300,000 roughly that still has to be paid out per that agreement. Paying down the debt consistent with what we've done in the past, managing our rental properties. We have a couple houses, the Amtrak facility, and then just knowing that we're going to have continued legal costs associated with the litigation that's currently out there. But then not identifying any projects to be completed during this biennium until such a discussion and direction is provided by the commission on what we'd like to see of urban renewal. So did you have anything to add?
I think it's a good summation.
Before you launch into yours, I just want to emphasize, once again, Mr. Conkle's done a great job summarizing everything that we need to know. I want to make clear that this is a point in time. This is the current state of affairs. And what we discussed today is the current state of affairs. Going forward, and at my request, I believe we're going to have a meeting to go over urban renewal in depth, what it means, how it's financed, what the impact of different choices of action will be. It's for our education and for the education of the community. So having said that, once again, emphasize this is the current state of affairs. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Parno for a more in-depth. Commissioner Smith.
This could be fairly lengthy, but I will try to cut it as short as possible. I'm talking about topics that may not have been on the agenda in terms of the full scope of the budget, but since it's clearly stated so many times in the budget statement, I feel like I need to speak to it. I have major concerns about the budget message, mainly because and I appreciate your efforts, or at least what sounds like your efforts in making sure that this commission can address some of the topics that we all feel need to be talked about at some point. However, I believe that should have happened way before we spend $11 million. The city commission has a goal session that is a full process in which the city commission as a whole can work its way towards a focus on how to spend their budget. this commission did not do anything near the sort, nor did we even have any meeting at all since this new commission has been intact, even after multiple members of the city commission have asked for that. So my concern is, one, we have not had a dialogue as an urban renewal agency at all. And the reason I think that's important is because, one, we are in a lawsuit over this very thing. Most of the budget is based on obligations from a past commission, past urban renewal commission. Also, the lawsuit itself fronted by a past commission, neither of which have talked about any of these issues, about the continuation of the lawsuit, the future of urban renewal, any of those topics. And that would be something to kind of separate until you read this budget document, which basically is fronted by a legal argument, which I'm not saying is untrue, because clearly we as an urban renewal agency are separate from the city, and we legally can do whatever we want in terms of moving forward with urban renewal. But I know that that is the commission's feeling of the past city commission's viewpoint was, as long as we can legally do it, we will move forward and do it without a dialogue. And then to follow it up at the end here to say that it's very important to the commission to engage the residents to determine acceptable uses, I feel that we're negating that by moving forward, especially in as blunt of a way that it says, we have the right to do this, which is true, we can still do it, and we're meeting past obligations. But for someone like me, who sits on an urban renewal commission, who feels that urban renewal is extremely important to know that we have had voters say that they have major concerns on us spending any money at all. And what the past commission did was figure out how to work around that so that we follow all the guidelines that that measure says, but we work around it so we can still move forward. That bothers me, because that shows that we don't care what's happening, what the voters said, instead of actually taking a moment at that time to fix it. So now we're moving forward again by proposing a budget where we've not talked about the goals, we've not talked about any of these topics. And it's another flag, it's another thing to say, we have not had this dialogue. And at what point do we really have that clear dialogue? I feel that if we try to fix it, every step forward to pushing forward on spending that goes around what the voters ask is a harder chance that we're going to fix it. And if we want to see developments happen at the river site, which I do, and if I want to see developments at the mill site, even the one little section that is part of the urban renewal district, which I do, and I think that some of those projects probably won't happen unless we have a community dialogue to fix urban renewal. But I feel every time we make one of these moves, we're negating that, and we're going to have a harder time fixing it. And so I have massive concerns about it, and massive enough that there's no way that I would support a budget being approved here. And in fact, when the city budget comes to final approval, I will probably vote against it if it has any ties to urban renewal. I really feel that strongly about it. I think that a lot of this dialogue could have happened at any moment since January, where we have called as a city commission for a meeting of the Urban Renewal Commission. It hasn't happened. And here we are now spending $11 million legally on what the city manager is saying is a holding budget, which I don't even know what that really means. And that's respectful of a DDA that we had not approved as a commission at all. And I think I'll leave it at that. I just wish we would have had a dialogue before we got here. I think it's the transparency is questionable.
I'll answer first before I ask Mr. Conkle to follow up in depth. I share many of the same sentiments, as you well know. I do want to engage the community. I realize that tonight, and this is why I emphasize that this is a point in time. It's not, it's what we adopt and is subject to amendment by us as commissioners and the commission. So I'm going to ask Mr. Conkle maybe to explain in depth. Again, I don't feel that this is a commitment to go forward over the next 2 years with this, but this is as of today, subject to change, depending on the very meeting that Commissioner Smith has asked for, which I, on Friday, sent Mr. Conkle a letter asking for that very type of meeting post haste so that we can discuss it, educate this group, educate the city commissioner, and educate the public as to move forward and get support we need and do this in a forthright manner. Tony, is there anything that you care to add to that?
I guess the only thing I would add is, I guess why I considered it a holding budget was because the intent was to pay down the debt, our obligation to pay down the debt,
Right.
which we have to do on a yearly basis. That we felt it was appropriate based on the circuit court decision that the general fund should not continue to pay the operating cost for the staffing of the district, which is reflected in this budget. We had the reimbursement from the Urban Renewal Agency to the commission for the last 2.5 to 3 years of work that was urban renewal related, directly tied to the district, but paid for out of the general fund. The Cove DDA, the Development and Disposition Agreement, you're right, was approved by a previous commission, but it is binding. And so we haven't spent all those funds because they haven't met all their preconditions, but we are, under the current DDA, obligated to pay those, so we felt appropriate to budget those. Principal and interest, that's the payment, operating contingency, and then the 5.6 and then the 7.2 million would be the ending reserve that would just be contingency held in reserve. It's not identified for any project or funding or whatnot. So we just felt like we had minimum obligations, debt, staffing, and a DDA. And I think we can have this discussion, trying to be respectful of what that ballot measure said, but, the circuit court also said it's not in place. And so we just felt it was appropriate to allocate the cost directly to where they were being incurred. So I guess that's just why I use that terminology. Whether that was accurate or not is neither here nor there.
As we review the budget line item by line item, we can have those individual discussions, but, I don't want anybody to stumble over terminology. Basically, meet existing obligations, subject to change depending on what commission dictates in the future. Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I have what I think are 2 quick questions. One, can you confirm for me, since I'm new to this committee, that any new projects or ideas for projects would all have to come before this committee for approval, no matter how big or how small?
Correct.
Is that correct?
It
That
is.
is correct. Okay, so that kind of helps us keep at a steady state. If nothing is going to happen, no new approvals for projects, I don't care if they're $10,000 or $100,000, they have to come before us for approval for anything to move forward.
Right. And I guess I'd caveat that by saying, we do have multiple rental properties,
than
of
what we
which we
approve
do,
here. Yeah.
we have
Right,
maintenance, roofs, whatever pops
Right,
up that we
right,
deal
right.
with, but not a new,
I mean,
somebody wanted a $10,000
new
storefront
urban renewal
grant.
projects,
Right.
right. My second question is, can you, and I apologize, Mr. Parno, we are probably jumping in and not giving you a chance to speak, but since we just had our budget committee meeting last week, and this budget talks about a reimbursement to general fund, can you speak really quickly, was that included as revenue into the proposed budget numbers that we looked at last week, or not?
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner Lyle Smith. That was included in the general government revenues that
Okay.
we received for reimbursement from the general fund in that budget that was
Okay.
approved.
Thank you.
And when we get to that line item, there'll be some additional discussion. Mr. Mike Mitchell asked me to ask a specific question, but I'm going to hold off on that until we get to that point. So hearing no other comments, I'm going to allow Mr. Parno to proceed with your explanations.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell and Budget Committee members. So it's an excellent discussion, and I appreciate Commissioner Smith bringing those points to light and City Manager Conkle answering some of those. And I think I'd like to just touch on that a little bit with a practical discussion on how the budget was put together from a legal standpoint for the committee members as well as Commissioner Smith. So we are required under the state law to hold this hearing in order to receive property taxes. So this has to take place. And the budget, it's an interesting time because there's an outstanding matter regarding the future of the agency, which is to be determined by the Urban Renewal Commission. And that was made very clear to me anyway at the budget goal the goal setting retreat of the City Commission. They were respectful to the additional members of the Urban Renewal Agency Commission, but said we need to have a discussion to talk about the future of the urban renewal. So as the city manager said, this is the bare minimum budget that we're putting together here. So we're doing two things. One is we're having this hearing so that we can bring in the property tax revenue. And two is at the conclusion, we'll come and talk to the commission about appropriating the funds. And those appropriations are very limited in scope. So as the city manager said, we've got a reimbursement that we can talk about and paying the agency's expenses. It's just common cost accounting that one agency shouldn't pay another agency's expenses, and Urban Renewal doesn't have any staff. They don't have their own attorneys, and I think as a precautionary measure, last budget cycle, we just decided to have the general fund pay everything for Urban Renewal. I don't know that that was illegal to have those expenses be paid out of Urban Renewal anyway, because in order to shut down the agency, if that was the course that the Urban Renewal Commission took, you'd still have to incur administrative costs to pay the debt, to have an audit, to file impact reports, and so forth. Erin spends quite a lot of time on the budget, so I'd like for her to get reimbursed for that. So we're doing that. And I think what I would like to do is just point out to start with, if you go to this one-page budget, the very first number that I want to jump to is right above, it's the very last line, right above total requirements. And it's reserved for future expenditure. And in the far right, last column, you can see a $7.2 million number, 7240024. Does everyone see that? Mm-hmm. That is basically the ending reserve that we are not spending by not incurring any additional projects until such time as the Urban Renewal Commission determines what to do with those funds. They won't be spent. Now, I would, of course, city manager, and I would support whatever decision the Urban Renewal Commission is going to make. And in a later discussion, I'm sure there's a lot of information that could be had to make a good determination that everybody feels comfortable with and supports the citizens of Oregon City, the voters of Oregon City. But that $7.2 million could be spent to pay off debt and close down the district. It could be spent on future projects if that was what was determined. But that big of a number right down there at the bottom is just saying that's what Tony's talking about when he's saying we're in a holding pattern. We've got $7.2 million we're doing nothing with. And to answer Commissioner Lyle Smith even in a little bit further, under state law purchasing practices, if you were to enter into an agreement that was significant over the city manager's signing authority, you'd have to come to the commission and ask their approval to do that, anything over $50,000. In addition to that, the way this budget is set up, we would also need to ask the Urban Renewal Commission for a budget amendment to take some of this $7.2 million out of the holding pattern and put it into a spending for a project. So you've got two layers of requirement for the Urban Renewal Commission to approve any kind of project funding. So I'll start with, yeah.
So can you explain to me when I'm looking at the bottom half of the spreadsheet of the budget numbers, you were just talking about the $7,240,000. When I look at, you have it year, and then biennium, and everything else adds up to the biennium number, but the last two lines do not line up, or do not add up. So the 60,000 and the 127 for operating contingency don't add up to 127. And then the same bottom line. So I'm trying to figure out, unless you're mixing revenues and expenses, in this section, there's not consistency here of these two add up to be, can you explain?
I can, absolutely. Thank you, Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner Lyle Smith. So that is a great question that we could point out right away. So those are the two numbers, and we've had this question in the past, so it's astute of you to catch that as well. But we added a note right at the bottom, because we always get that question. So the reserves, the ending balance reserves are the only numbers that won't add across, because they are an established point of time, the ending reserve balance. Year one and year two equal across in all the expenditures that we would do, but the ending reserves, it's the second year of the biennium, that's where you're gonna end up in your reserves. And we put that little tiny note, it's probably hard to see, explaining that.
Very, very bottom of
The
the
very,
page,
very bottom, which,
Where it says note.
in like
but I will say
seven
Commissioner
font.
Lyle Smith doesn't have that on hers. So that
I would understand
That
why
totally
I
lets you
don't
off the
see a
hook there.
note.
So that's what we're gonna give you.
I'm like, I'm missing a note.
Yeah, for some reason that wasn't on your copy, so.
Yeah.
But that's, in response to your question, so that's a really good catch, so that all the other columns add across, and it's really a byproduct of how we have to put this together under local budget law, those ending balance reserves. It's the last column equals the final number. It's a point in time. It's a little bit of a funny accounting.
Do you need these?
Go ahead.
No, you can keep it. We're fine.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Because I could also just probably really quickly go through and balance out each of the lines, because it is just a very short budget.
Yeah, I have other questions. I didn't know if you were going to go through line by line.
Thanks.
If it pleases the committee, could I just go through line by line and you can jump in? So,
There's not that many lines.
Yeah.
yeah, there's not that many lines. Thank you, Commissioner McGriff. So, to make things easy, I'm just going to start at the very top line, and I'm going to stick to the far right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth column. And of course, there's numbers in between, but we cannot catch all those. So we've got a beginning fund balance of 5.4 million. That's carryover from the prior operating biennium budget that was also on hold. So we're starting this biennium with $5.4 million of unspent funds. Then we have property taxes, which in this case add across to over the 2 years of $5.7 million. That's about $2.9 million in property taxes that the Urban Renewal Agency earns from tax increment financing each year. Then we have rental income of just over $100,000, and that's on the 4 rental properties. We've got the Coasters Crossing, which is over at the Amtrak station. We've got Clackamas Landscape, and we've got 2 houses that are near the Moot.
Yep.
We can talk about those more if you'd like. It's kind of a funny thing. And then we've got some interest income there, and there's a boost in interest income because the rates have been increasing. So let's talk about the expense side. The very first.
So wait, so
Yeah.
before you, so which rates did you increase? I'm just curious, the 2 houses that we're renting, or the Amtrak station and the Clackamas Landscape, which I have no idea why we're owning that, but
We own the land.
Yeah, so there isn't, I'd have to look at the agreements for the houses. I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that there was a significant change when Coasters Crossing came in to the Amtrak station. That agreement, the commission at the time was very specific about having that have an escalator to get us to market rates.
Okay.
So I used a pretty rough estimate, but from 100 to 107 is definitely an escalator on Coasters Crossing to be able to operate in the Amtrak station.
So we are renting out those houses still on South Second?
Yes.
Okay, wasn't there, am I completely wrong that we stopped that at one point? So is that a new thing coming back? Because I thought we,
Stop renting them?
yeah.
To them, or did we?
While I was on the commission before, I thought we stopped
Okay.
that.
I think there was some
There was a
discussion.
dialogue
Yeah,
about,
there was some dialogue.
I'll have to go back and look.
Okay, and please educate me if I'm,
Okay.
so we're renting out to bring in income,
Okay.
and I guess I'll just say the funny thing, which is the original intent, I think, of those houses was to buy and maybe put in a tram or
You
something.
do not want to bring up that topic, Brett.
It is what it
No,
is,
that-
and
no,
so
I-
there's some
I-
I probably
decisions.
brought it
I
up.
don't think that, I
Decisions
don't
to be
think that
made.
was correct. That was,
Oh, okay.
No, that's
no.
exactly correct.
So the 2
Even more
houses
importantly, I shouldn't have brought
are
it up, right?
located generally where?
down from the
Near the
VFW
moot,
hall.
the end of
Yeah.
Across
the
from
Museum
Moot.
of the Oregon Territories?
Okay, because I didn't think the urban renewal district went that far. I mean, and again, I'm going from boundary
Like I said,
in
you
my.
don't want to bring this topic up.
No, I'm not concerned about the houses, I'm just trying to figure out, because I know where the boundary skirts through,
Right.
because my property is in the urban renewal boundary.
Yeah, it's within the boundary, and it's true. I apologize, Chair and committee members. I probably shouldn't encourage a discussion on all the policy matters, so we're trying to get a budget passed. So,
Agreed.
Probably
and I
should
definitely
have
don't
the
want to say something that's out of turn, so I'll
No,
just
no.
keep moving along. Thank you.
You're good.
Thank you. So that covers
Well, I
the
mean,
resources?
I just noticed a big jump from 120,000 of this biennium to 207 for this biennium. So that's more than a $7,000 increment, kind of, which is what you implied with the increase in Amtrak.
There was I'm sorry,
so-
Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner Lau Smith, there was a concerted effort by the Urban Renewal Commission to make sure that we were collecting market rates on those rentals. That was a
So there
serious
was
discussion
also a year where we weren't collecting anything,
Right.
on the Amtrak.
so
With the-
now we are.
Yeah, with the previous user,
Right.
there was no rent paid
Yeah,
for
there's no rent
multiple months.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's fine, and I kind of wanted to
So the actuals are
separate
off a little, then,
rental increases for houses that we are renting versus places we're operating as businesses. I mean, if we're conscious about all this equitable housing work that we're doing and affordable housing in our city, I would hate to think that we're the ones jacking up rental rates.
No, it's a completely different
You know,
topic.
I think what you're
But you're
gonna.
including two houses, so.
Correct, I think what you're gonna, I think if we went back, the actual, when you look at the actuals, because we did not collect rent on the previous renter of Amtrak because of lack of payment, the actual is very low. And now that we have
Okay.
a renter in there with an escalation who's actually paying every month,
Okay.
that number is gonna come in
That
higher.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes logic, so, okay.
I would add that the budget's higher because the Urban Renewal Commission made a concerted effort to make sure we were charging market rates.
Continue on.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a look at that rental income of $207,000 in the resources and compare that to 3 lines down in the requirements of rental expenses of $80,000. So the Urban Renewal Agency currently owns some properties and rental income exceeds by $127,000. The revenue exceeds the expenses for running those properties. Not that that's the business of the Urban Renewal, but I think that was the Urban Renewal Commission making an effort to make sure that we're earning some income until such time as the fate of those properties is determined.
Could I add a little postscript? But it
Sure.
is my opinion that the urban renewal agency can own properties and collect rents. It's a typical activity that is,
Legal, and we're doing.
legal, and the Association of Urban Renewal Agencies in the state of Oregon also, other agencies do this as well. So-
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not anything that's unusual. As many of you know, I used to work for the Portland Development Commission, which is the city of Portland's urban renewal agency, now called something else, which I don't want to repeat that name. We owned substantial numbers of properties, of which I, as a staff person, was part manager of those properties. So that is very typical. It was our understanding when we would purchase these properties that we were not holding on to them for the long term, we were holding on to them for the short term, and that eventually they would be resold or they would be deleted because it was a property that was for redevelopment. So I don't have any issue with any of the commercial properties that we currently own.
Thank you, Commissioner McGriff. So I think what I was kind of looking to approach here is these 3 aspects that Tony talked about. One is the Urban Renewal Agency paying its management costs. 2 is the cost of the rental properties. And 3 is paying the debt. Anything left over is in the hold. So we talked about the rental properties. As far as the first 2 lines, agency administration, legal services, and then that 4th line down, cost reimbursement. So I asked our senior accountant to go through the last 2.5 years of bills for actual costs incurred. We've got a record of those, plus staff time to administer the agency. And that's what that $867,000 repays to the general fund. I would be at a loss to have the city's general fund have a deficit to be able to pay the agency's bills. The agency is a benefit to all the participating jurisdictions, and it's its own entity that needs to take care of its own business.
And to interrupt for a moment, Mr. Parno, that was exactly Mike Mitchell's question. Why does that line item show up now when previously it did not show up? So the explanation is we should seek reimbursement for those accounting services and staff services that we provide for the agency.
Well, thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Thank you for sharing Urban Renewal Commissioner Mike Mitchell's question. I really appreciate that. And I think to even add to that, if you look at the first two columns in the actual categories, 2013 through 15 and 2015 through 17, the agency did pay those costs, and that's the appropriate thing to do. It was just with the 2017 through 19, that third column, where we created a budget, and that was those 2 years plus that we didn't reimburse the city, so we're doing a catch-up. But thank you for pointing that out.
The first line agency administration, is that the cost for the urban renewal going forward?
Yes.
Okay. So if it's $220,000 a year and you're asking reimbursements for $867 for 2.5 years, why is there such a big difference? Because that would only be $440,000 for 2 years.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of difference because we took the actual costs, and the budget is a placeholder for what we would transfer. And we had a period of time where we didn't have an economic development manager. We also had a period of time where there were legal costs incurred specifically. And actually, to answer your question, Committee Member McCall, I would take the agency administration and the legal services, those top two lines,
Okay.
add those two together because the reimbursement covers agency administration, actual legal costs that the agency paid out, actual expenses paid to the auditors, and so forth. And so I'm very comfortable with the $867,000 number because it's based on all actuals, and the 220 plus the 60 are estimates moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, makes perfect sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that question.
Mr. Parno,
Yes.
has the $867,000 figure been audited, been reviewed?
It has been reviewed by myself after preparation by the senior accountants, and we have not hired an external auditing firm.
It wasn't part of any other previous audits. That was, I guess, my only, sounds like no.
No, I appreciate that question.
Continuing on.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. And then I'm going to move down. That covers those two aspects of the agency paying its own bills and the rental properties. And then I'm going to move down to that line item called capital outlay. And in the far right column, there's $300,000 there. Sometimes I've run into where that can be a little bit confusing in the presentation of the way we're required to establish things under local budget law. So in the 2017 through 2019 third column, there's a $700,000 budget to spend capital outlay. In the new proposed biennium, there's a $300,000 budget to spend capital outlay. The $300,000 is carryover of unspent monies from the $700,000. So what that means, as City Manager Conkle explained, is there was a pre-existing agreement, and as Commissioner Rocky Smith said, under a prior commission that is under contract law. So since the creating of that budget, of the $700,000, $400,000 has been reimbursed on the cove, like it or not. That leaves $300,000 in the current budget. I've been asked in the past, does that mean there's $1 million that could be spent? No, that just means that of the 700 from the last budget, there's 3 left that hasn't been spent. So I do want to, I guess, provide assurance, because I can't tell you how important it is to me that we, just like the commissioners, that we honor the voters and the community and the commissioners' will on the Urban Renewal Commission. So that $300,000 is the only project commitment that's in this budget. And it was a pre-existing commitment that was prior to the election, and the the language even in that election charter amendment says that it would honor pre-existing commitments.
Any questions on that specific item? Continuing on. Sir?
So, I'm debating whether or not to say this.
Oh, you will.
I think we air it out, Commissioner Smith. Let's see what we got to say.
One of my concerns, I mean, I'm not arguing whether or not we should, well, I might be, but I understand the moving forward and committing, or at least putting forward what was committed to by the former commission. I question some of that, but I understand the reasoning for doing that. My concern, though, is that is also based on a DDA where the developers are also agreed to do certain things, which after the ribbon cutting, I'm convinced they're not. So I will mention this because I was at the ribbon cutting event where one of the reasons, one of the specific uses for the phase one, although I guess this is a different topic because this is phase two, right? This piece.
Different developer.
But I guess my concern is there's some things that I feel in the project currently that aren't being followed through on. And so, you know, our argument that we're following through on when I believe that some of the other agreements are not being followed on concerns me. And I'll mention specifically the issue, which was at the grand opening, I will say one person very involved in development, when I wanted to tour the building, we did tour the building. I asked questions about the retail spaces, which were clearly marked by parking spaces, retail on the entire first floor of phase one, where someone very involved with the development said flat out they will never be used for retail space. That concerns me greatly. And I feel like one of my concerns about moving forward in any spending, again, goes back to my comments earlier on, especially when flat out people are saying that some of those commitments on their end are not going to be followed through on. That bothers me a lot.
I'll join in on that comment. I also was there. It's more a policy discussion than it is a budgetary discussion, only in that to benefit from the vertical tax credit, they're supposed to have buildings occupied by retail establishments. Now, I don't know how closely that's defined. Either you provide space or they're actually operating. I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's a subject of a discussion that we need to have, but that's not the budgetary discussion tonight. But I do welcome that discussion.
We'll just have it after we approve $11 million.
Again, it's for this point in time, subject to amendment by this commission going forward.
It's my understanding
Mr.
that
Gifford.
the terminology on the vertical housing development zone is not for retail, it is for non-residential components. That is to say, it could have office spaces in there, as long as someone isn't living in there. That's what I understand, the terminology is non-residential component.
Well, again, we'll get legal opinions on that. If the plan was to benefit from the vertical tax credit
Well,
and
sure.
and leave them vacant, never to be occupied, is that a good
It's certainly
faith effort?
non-residential. I think is disingenuous.
Very sneaky.
Well, again, and that's what Commissioner Smith is alluding to, and I think
Very
that's a
sneaky.
subject for another meeting, and I encourage that discussion mightily.
So
Commissioner Lyle Smith.
I was just gonna say, so to put a more fine point on it, Mr. Conkle, can we put this on your to-do list, or Mr. Parno, to follow up with the city commission on what exactly is the language of the vertical tax credit? You know, look into this. Is this something we should be concerned about? Is this something we could remedy in the future going forward if we have no course of action at this point in time? So just kind of add that to the to-do
Agreed.
list that I believe we're going to get in review probably before too long. So,
Certainly.
thanks.
I have a question, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Commissioner McGriff.
Tony, I believe you can explain this very simply, that both parties have signed agreements. There are performance standards in many of these types of contracts that X, Y, and Z happens before you can get dollars. So if you could just reiterate that to maybe alleviate concerns people have, because there are consequences. It's not like, well, they're not going to be able to just say, well, we're not going to do it. There are definitely, let's just say, maybe I wouldn't call them penalties, but there are performance issues that can.
As part of the disposition and development agreement with Hudson Holding for the urban renewal property, there were certain preconditions that had to be met. I think there were 11 of them. And then the agency also approved reimbursement of some costs and some cost sharing because there was significant investment in design and engineering and environmental studies of public property, of agency-owned properties. And so some of the upfront reimbursement was, for example, an environmental phase 2 for the public properties. So we paid for some of that because they went and did the work for it, and we reimbursed on that. So the expenditures to date have been reimbursements on design and engineering costs related to the public infrastructure on the property. Yes, there are performance deadlines and dates when certain things need to be accomplished in that agreement.
And again, I would say, monies are set aside in the budget. As far as releasing those monies becomes an operational issue.
Right.
And that's at that time we take into account, are the performance indicators being met? And if not, then we make adjustments.
And they don't get any money.
That's exactly it in plain language.
Yeah, I mean, the reimbursements are based on agreed upon investments with
right.
receipts to back them up.
Right. Thank you so much for that.
Mr. Parno, if you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell, and I wonder, not to put you on the spot, City Manager Boss, but in regard, you made a really, okay, I know. Please.
It's not the lead-in I wanted.
I think it's a good one, though. I think you made a good point, which was, you made a really good point, which I think was a little bit assuring in regard to that 700,000 where there's 300,000 remaining, about what that outlay of cost was for. And it was specifically part of the agreement with the developers, but it was the city's outlay and paid out toward proof of completion of public projects like the street.
Right, the design, the mass grading, the engineered plans, the infrastructure plans that are all in the publicly owned and will remain publicly owned parts of the property.
And some of the Urban Renewal Agency commission's intent behind that, I think, was even if things didn't pencil out, and I'm not saying that they wouldn't be held accountable, I think that's a discussion that we're hearing loud and clear needs to be had. But there was some discussion at that time, and that you brought that to the commission and said, at a minimum, we still have a street that would serve us into the future for any future development. So that was a good place to start. And it was there was a strategic thought process behind earmarking those dollars toward public infrastructure that would serve that area, irrespective of what happened with that particular developer.
Right.
So I think
we would own the plans, essentially. We would own the grading plans, we would own the design, as they finish those. We own the environmental phase 2 report. So that was part of the negotiation there.
I remember those discussions. Continuing on.
Okay, thank you, Chair and committee members. So we're coming toward the conclusion. And the easier part, so the principal and interest, just for information purposes, the city manager, Conkle, and I have had discussions. Obviously, you have to pay the debt. Those are covenants under those agreements that you have to repay your debt, so that's included in the budget. I think, I've contemplated the actual outstanding debts, and we show the principal and interest payments toward the bottom of the page. There's about $7 million outstanding in debt, and our projections show that we could pay off the debt within 3 years. That means if the Urban Renewal Commission determined that that was a course that could be done and we could close the district. I'm not advocating it for or against. That's just a point. So we're going to pay the debt in this budget. This budget includes a lot of flexibility for the Urban Renewal Commission to make a determination about the future of the district. And I've heard, just in passing conversations here and there over the last 6 months or so, that it would be good to have a lot of information about options for the commission to consider. And I've heard and want to make a strong voice to support what Commissioner Smith said earlier, which is I've heard from the Urban Renewal Commissioners that there's an intent to respect the community and what their wishes are. So there's just some decisions that need to be made. And that will come. To kind of summarize what Tony had said and what we went through here line by line just now is we're required under the law to have this hearing to establish that we can collect the property taxes for the district. We're having the Urban Renewal Agency pay its operating costs, which are around 9%, which is pretty low. Usually we're talking 15% on an annual basis. We're honoring one small agreement that's related to infrastructure for a particular area. And that leaves $7.2 million, which is quite a substantial sum in the reserves, awaiting determination by the Urban Renewal Commission. So that's the budget you have before you. Thank you, Chair.
Very good. Is there any questions overall on the budget? Commissioner Lyle Smith.
I have one follow-up question. The $867,000 reimbursement, since the Budget Committee has already approved the proposed city budget, and that's going to go to the City Commission, this would obviously, if this was adopted tonight, and if everything gets adopted moving forward, hypothetically, what is the process for the city to consider that $867,000 in the budget process? Is there an amendment? What's,
Okay,
is that something that the city commission or the budget committee gets called back together, or what happens next?
Thank you. Chair O'Donnell, Commissioner Lyle Smith, want to be extremely transparent about that. So in June, when we bring the Oregon City budget to the City Commission for adoption that was approved by the Budget Committee, and in June, when we bring to the Urban Renewal Commission this budget for adoption, if it's approved by the committee, they would adopt those budgets. And there is no other step. At that time, my intention would be to transfer the funds out of the Urban Renewal's bank account into the city's bank account. And I didn't have intention to come back and ask. That's a little bit different than me saying, let's go and create a project or something and spend the money. These are actual expenses that have already occurred. They've been spent. They're Urban Renewal bills that have been paid by the general fund. So I just want to be 100% transparent. It's my intention to just transfer those monies.
So that being said, is there a sequence that the meetings need to be held in to ensure that we don't have to backtrack? Do we do the Urban Renewal meeting first and everybody agrees and gets approved?
Chair and Commissioner Lyle Smith, I think that's a brilliant observation.
That's
I think
a basic observation.
Yeah, it makes sense. That would, I think it would be, we should have the Urban Renewal Commission meeting for consideration of adoption of the budget first. And then the Oregon City meeting for consideration of the adoption of the Oregon City budget second. And that is how the city manager and I have talked about putting that, with the recorder, putting that on the agenda. Typically, those Urban Renewal Agency meetings come first.
Okay.
And would there be a regular Urban Renewal Commission meeting before that?
We're looking at trying to, in my discussions with Commissioner O'Donnell, having the first meeting in June, having urban renewal before the regular meeting, so at 6 o'clock, to begin the discussion about to have urban renewal or not, or what additional
And
questions.
it would come to us, the budget would come to us June what?
The second one in June.
June 19th.
19th, I believe.
Okay.
I think the first one is, June 5 and then June 19 are the two regular meetings in June.
And if I am understood by our finance director, if I understood this question earlier that I had, that June 19th meeting is really the last meeting where we can approve basically a budget, right? Or, because the deadline is July what?
July 1.
So we don't have a lot of wiggle room there.
So Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner Smith and committee members, I think I understand the intent.
I guess I would recommend moving the Urban Renewal Commission sometime a lot sooner than June 1st if we're stuck with one other meeting after that to approve a budget.
Yeah, Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner Smith, I think I understand the intent of what you're saying, which is, and I think I understand there could be some trepidation, and I don't think it's fully necessary to feel that way, and I want to sort of backpedal a little bit on how I answered the question for Commissioner Lau Smith, simply because I was stating my intent, and that's still my intent to make that transfer. However, in general, I want to make this general statement really clearly. So when we process a budget, that is setting the appropriation guidelines under the state law and the authority of the boards to set those budgets. That's not making actual things happen. So those are the guidelines that we have. So the intent of this urban renewal budget, even very specifically, as I said, when we got that $7.2 million in reserve, that placeholder is saying there's $7.2 million that aren't going to do anything until the Urban Renewal Commission makes a determination. Pay off debt, look for other options, that has yet to be determined. And so if a budget were adopted in June, which I highly recommend, that gives us the authority to start collecting property taxes to let the assessor know. And that's the state law requirement, that we have to adopt a budget before July 1 so that we can tell the assessor, please go out and levy the taxes.
Can that budget subsequently be amended?
Absolutely. So subsequent to that, in terms of any kind of agreements, the commission could have that discussion. They could have it, I'm not recommending that, they could have a year from now. They could give direction to the city manager, we'll hold off, we want to work through and figure out these things and do everything right. And then, as I stated before, thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell, that's a good point, is in order to use that 7.2 million, we have two steps we have to go through. We have to come to the commission and ask for a budget amendment. And there are state law guidelines that require a public hearing if it's over a certain amount. And then if there were any type of contractual agreements that are over this, the manager of the Urban Renewal Commission's spending authority, which I think is $50,000, that would have to come to the commission. And so again, what I put in here for rental expenses is just the minimum $40,000 a year to fix the roof if we need to. But if we're going to go in and do a project, that would require Urban Renewal Commission approval and budget authority. So I guess to summarize, that's a little bit long-winded, but I guess to summarize is I would recommend that we adopt a budget to be able to bring in our property tax revenue, whether you want to use that to pay off debt or whatever you want to do. And I fully support and have heard, and I know the city manager has heard clearly, the commission needs to have a discussion about the future of urban renewal.
And it's so important that we're meeting 6 months in to do it. And my other question would be, what is the timeline on the next step in the legal issues that we're involved in?
What is
The next,
the process?
yeah, right now it's going to appeals.
Court of Appeals.
What's the timeline for that?
They are submitting briefs, and then they would schedule oral arguments. Court of Appeals is much, much slower than Land Use Board of Appeals. So, maybe 6 months. You would
From now.
You would get a hearing, 6 to 9 months, and then you probably got another 9 to 12 months to get a decision if we were lucky.
That's when the attorneys say it depends, and we actually asked City Attorney Kabizman, what do you think the status is? And it was about that timeline that Tony said, well, within a year or so.
So before it goes to appeals, the arguments are have to be submitted when?
I'd have to go back and check. I believe we've already done, at the circuit court, we made, our briefs were submitted, arguments were made. There was then an appeal, of which now they brief the appeal issue.
Right.
All right, so we brought an appeal, they brought an appeal, so we submit new briefs,
And those have
They're-
already been submitted?
They're due in 3 weeks.
I understand
The
what you're
timeline
saying,
is interesting, just saying.
and I understand what you're saying,
If
Commissioner
We've
Smith.
held this meeting off, Urban Renewal Commission, and if we do June 1st, that's 6 months that we've put a meeting off. As a legal issue is still moving forward, without any direction by this group. And when much of the budget, a good chunk, a fair amount of budget is about legal expenses. I don't know why no one has a problem with this.
Well, I think people do have a problem with it, Rocky, and I think that's why we've asked to post haste, let's have a meeting in depth, let's go over
I don't know
about.
why we wait till June 1st. I would make a motion to move that meeting up.
And I would,
That's
can
a
I second the
motion.
motion? Can the chair second the motion or not?
Yeah, you can second it.
Well, then I'd second, because I feel it's an urgent matter. I feel that there's things that we
I don't
cannot,
think this is an urban renewal meeting.
not a commission meeting.
Not a budget meeting.
Yeah, I think we can,
Yeah.
I don't think we can.
Yeah, this is a budgetary
This is a
discussion.
budget
Sorry.
meeting.
Yeah.
But,
I understand all your
Until we have a
concerns.
real meeting, when am I supposed to make a motion? We'll just keep delaying it, and we'll have a meeting June 1st. That sounds amazing.
And just so you know.
We had a discussion.
I withdraw my motion.
We had a discussion. We were hiring the economic development manager. We had a commissioner resign, of which an urban renewal commissioner member was applying for the city commission position. And we had a discussion about holding off until some of those things
We didn't have a discussion.
shook out.
So don't say we.
Fine, I brought it forward that it seemed appropriate to wait until we had a full city commission and a full urban renewal commission, because
And
both
we
of
do.
those were in flux.
And we do.
Yeah, I will say, I do know that I asked specifically when we were going to get things going and we were waiting to fill the seat because we had a vacancy on both this committee and the city commission that we were trying to fill, luckily with Commissioner McGriff. So she's lucky to fill that role now.
Just
Chair.
a moment, Mr. Gifford. We're probably migrating outside the budgetary discussion, but I do want everybody to know that on Sunday, I wrote Tony a letter expressing those very same sentiments. How soon can we do this? Here's the points we need to talk. I know that we may have missed the moment, but we still need to get our house in order. And that's the subject of that meeting, not tonight's meeting. So I know we'll move forward on that as fast as we can.
We'll address it at the city commission meeting.
Yes, we will. Mr. Gifford.
To kind of steer this back towards the
Budget.
budget, we are legally required to pass a budget. And in order to do that, I think the budget has been presented that is not contrary to any of the legal aspects of the initiative. And it fulfills our obligations, whether we agree with those obligations or not, we're legally bound to them. And I think that there are a lot of other things that will need to be worked out.
Agreed.
But understanding that any budget can be amended, and the future of the commission is something still to be considered, but that does not obviate the issue that we have to get a budget passed. And to that end, I would like to make a motion
Please do.
that we
Second.
approve the 2019-21 urban renewal biennial budget of $11,549,980 and establish the maximum amount of tax from the Division of Taxes that can be levied.
You seconded? Seconded by Commissioner McGriff. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries.
Ask for any abstentions, just in case.
Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Now the work begins.
Right, and this is an aside, this meeting is actually about to come to an end, but we will take care of the very issues, the procedural issues and policy issues, and we'll move forward with that in a separate venue. Mr. Van Haverby.
So I have a question on the process of modifying the budget. Is it going to require a meeting of the budget committee again,
Nope.
or just the urban renewal?
Yep.
Are we adjourned?
No.
No, we're not. I think
Thank you, Chair
that's
O'Donnell.
appropriate discussion. Go ahead.
And thank you, Committee Member Van Haverbeek. Under state law, after the budget has been approved by the Budget Committee, the Budget Committee function has been completed.
Any further discussion or questions? Meeting adjourned.